As stewards of this planet, it's our duty to protect it, not only from pollution, but from the ravages of short-sightedness and neglect. Yet, as we gather here today, we are confronted with a stark reality that our commitment to environmental protection is being undermined by the decisions of fossil, gas, and oil industry that are prioritizing profit over the well-being of our planet and the well-being of our people. Administrator Regan, commend you for your dedication to public service. The challenges we face demand bold action and unwavering resolve. Let me start with the topic of methane. The alarming rise in methane emissions poses a significant threat to our climate and to our public health. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, sometimes referred to as natural gas, but there is nothing natural about it once it's taken out of the ground. It is pouring fuel on the fire of climate chaos and making extreme weather more frequent and more devastating. We know that EPA's estimates of methane emissions are far lower than what are being observed with the latest monitoring tools. So we need better modeling using better technology. We can't use old estimates to justify projects that shouldn't be justified. Thankfully, EPA has finalized the super emitter program, well done, and created the methane emission reduction program through the Inflation Reduction Act. Together, the super emitter program and the methane emissions reduction program have the potential to significantly reduce methane emissions from oil and gas wells, but only if we use modern technologies. I'm deeply concerned that EPA, given its deep expertise regarding human health impacts, has deferred its role in obtaining and securing the technology that has been funded through the work of Congress. It's important to ensure we maximize the super emitters program in taking on this challenge. And we're also learning more about methane from landfills. Landfills provide an important cost-effective opportunity for us to reduce emissions now, and EPA needs to take a look at and update its regulations regarding landfills. Well, next, wildfires. In Oregon, we see wildfires becoming more powerful, more ferocious, and the wildfire season being longer, and that is a challenge. In that challenge, citizens are much more willing to use prescribed fire as a tool in our arsenal to protect our towns and our cities. It mitigates the risk of catastrophic blazes. And we need both strong science-based standards for clean air and regulatory clarity for exceptional events like prescribed fire. If the particles that are in the air from prescribed fire are then used to force communities to adopt stronger standards on other things, as if that was the same particles from a natural fire, then there's an incentive for these communities not to use prescribed fire, which makes the whole situation worse. So that's a piece that I hope we'll take on. Plastic pollution and toxic chemicals pose another formidable challenge. We know we are failing in our vulnerable communities, especially on the Gulf Coast, which are being overburdened by toxic chemicals from plastic production. We need to do more to protect those communities. On this committee, I'll do all I can to increase EPA funding so we can implement and enforce our existing laws better. But then EPA must act. One place one can start, the EPA can start, is by re-examining significant impact levels for air quality standards for permitting petrochemical facilities. The evidence is clear that the substances that are carcinogenic to humans and states have abused the permitting process to the detriment of frontline communities. Let's not impose even more pollutants on those frontline communities. This is a key issue of environmental justice. I was in Ottawa last week for the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee meeting where countries from around the world are gathered to reach agreement to address the plastic crisis. Plastics which are choking our oceans, our rivers, our landfills, plastics which are being digested by marine life and land life, infecting our ecosystems, plastic which in its micro form and nano form are providing even more dangerous pollution, and it's infiltrating our food and water, even breast milk. Meanwhile, leaching dangerous chemicals into the organisms that digest it, including us. It's estimated that each of us consumes about a credit card of plastic a week. Plastic is an endocrine disruptor, has strong associations with a series of health issues. So we're encouraging our government to take the ambitious track in having a vision for international treaty on plastics that will result in measurable goals with accountability for reaching those goals. Right now, our State Department is saying they want a Paris structure where everyone says, we will go and do our best. Going and doing our best hasn't worked on climate, and it won't work on plastics. So we need to have a more concrete, detailed approach, and there's a whole group of nations that are seeking to have a concrete goals and measurable results and accountability, and we should join them, and I encourage EPA to help us pivot to be part of the solution in that area. I wanted to turn to EPA's new method of testing for 6-PPD quinone. This is a chemical in tires, and it was found to be a chemical that has a huge impact on salmon. And there was a whole mystery as to why after rainstorms there was a die-off, and finally it was traced to the runoff from parking lots with tire dust. This is a big deal for us, and it's not an easy thing to address, but identifying and understanding it is a great first step in that direction. So I encourage EPA to continue down that road, not just to understand the chemical and what alternatives there might be, what the impact of those alternatives might be, how we can cure this problem, because it is a big environmental impact that few of us were aware of until the last couple of years. So as we go forward, let's continue to have an ambitious approach, or a more ambitious approach to taking on these multiple challenges. We need an international treaty that decreases plastics that are produced, plastics that get into our waterways, plastics that get into our ecosystems and into our bodies. We need to continue our work on toxic chemicals through TSCA and not have it take a decade to address a single toxic chemical in an overly complicated system. I am concerned that EPA staffing levels have dropped 20% over the last 13 years. It makes it a lot harder to do all this work on very complicated issues when you're understaffed. So thank you for being a strong advocate, for having the team that you need, and certainly that resonates with me and with many of us. In 2010, you had 17,300 FTEs at EPA. Since then, we're down to 14,000, 3,300 people with a lot more complicated work to do now than then. I'm pleased that the FY25 request would increase permanent positions by more than 2,000 FTEs, which would start to rebuild the permanent capacity EPA needs. Those Americans with the least resources who have chronically suffered from injustice are often most affected by pollution, toxic chemicals, and climate chaos. So I say well done to having $100 million for environmental justice in the FY24 bill. You all advocated and we delivered. But I know that on the environmental justice front, a lot more remains to be done.